Hey everybody, this is my 40-gallon brackish tank, although at the moment I don't think the water is quite actually to the level of brackish salinity. We're probably just below that. We'll find out by the end of this video whether or not we're going to bring it back all the way up to brackish levels or not. So tonight we're just going to do a water change. I would normally clean the glass a little bit later in the water change, but I think today we're going to start by cleaning the glass just so we can get a better look what's going on in the tank while I do the water change. So nothing special about cleaning the glass. I just use these little slices of melamine sponge. Just got to get them in the tank a little bit, get them nice and wet, and then they're good to go. I also have this little piece of styrofoam floating in the tank. We can take that out for the moment. I use that when feeding butterbean. I put is, if you're not familiar, butterbean is my figure-8 puffer. That is the central fish in this tank. I do have the orange sailfin molly in here, and there should still be some bumblebee gobies, but the tank is set up predominantly for my figure-8 puffer named Butterbean. And he usually does not like the water changes all that much, but if I'm not too aggressive about it, he doesn't get too terribly freaked out. Now, what I'm wiping off the glass here is probably a combination of the red the red cyanobacteria and brown diatom algae. I get the brown algae in this tank all the time. Not sure if it's due to the salts that are in here. I'm not exactly sure how silica is involved in the process of the diatoms making their shell. Meaning that I don't know if you actually have to have silica in your water. I have heard it said that through processes of, chemical reactions and whatnot, that whether there's silica in your water or not, the diatom algae can actually make silica and still produce its shell. So having the silicates in your water is not necessarily going to give you the diatom algae like that. So now that we are able to see into the tank a little bit, I'm going to start a gravel vac. And today I'm going to use this because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to get all that cyanobacteria off of the plants and everything. And I don't want the extreme suction of the hose we're going to use in a minute when I get around to trying to get the snail shells and everything off the bottom of the tank. I don't know how well this is going to work. Hoping I can break the stuff up enough. There we go. There's some chunks of it coming off. I may start a chemi-clean treatment on this tank after we've done this water change, but the first thing I want to do is the physical water change because I want to remove a lot of this stuff mechanically. You see this big old piece of it was actually floating on the surface. It's interesting, where it was thickest on some of the java leaves back here, the fronds have actually died Got brown tips on everything now. And at this point, we're not really drawing much water up through it at all anymore. The spout is so clogged up, so I'm going to pull this out. Try to knock that stuff out of there. Now I'm going to start the siphon again, but this time I'm not going to do it with my mouth. I'm actually going to get the hose primed with water first. And then that way I don't have to worry about getting any of this nasty cyanobacteria in my mouth. There is some growing on the gravel. I don't know if it'll get picked up by this. You can see it's trying, but it's got a few little bits of gravel stuck to it, and because of that, it's not really, you see it down here, it's not really coming up with it. Oh, there's a bumblebee goby, so I've still got at least one of them in there. And then, of course, these snail shells aren't really coming up with the amount of suction I've got on this either. So what we're going to do is dump this first 5-gallon bucket out, and then we're going to get my straight up vinyl hose, and we'll come back and we will start removing a lot of that stuff off of the bottom. My main goal with this one was just to get a lot of that cyanobacteria out of the tank, and I've done that. We've got a 5-gallon bucket full. Just give me a minute to go dump this out, and we'll come back and we'll do one more 5-gallon bucket, but with the vinyl hose. Alright, now this just has a regular hose end on it. And the goal of this one is going to be to get all those snail shells off the bottom. While pulling as few of the bits of gravel up as I can. And you got to be careful with this, because if you suck too many up at once, it'll definitely clog the hose up. It's important to try to pull them out one shell at a time, or if they're small, you can pull a few of them out. Gotta be careful. I got this bumblebee goby that's just insists on being around wherever I'm trying to clean up the bottom here. And that was 5 gallons exactly. I could not have timed that any better. Alright, so now it's just going to be a matter of filling the tank back up. And I'm going to start with some pre-mixed brackish water for the first 5 gallons. Give me a moment. In addition to the pre-mixed water, I'm actually just going to go ahead and use regular tap water. I have well water, so I don't have to condition it or anything. It's already been conditioned. And so while that is filling up, we are also going to fill it with some pre-mixed brackish water. Now, the reason I seem so cavalier with the salinity, I was saying when we first started the water change, I honestly wasn't really even sure what the salinity was when we got started. It should have been just below brackish, around 1.003, maybe 1.004, somewhere in there. And I've been having better luck with my figure 8 puffer with the lower end brackish. I used to keep it at 1.008, and I kept it at that for years. And I had minimal success with the Java fern in there. It grew, but saying it survived would be a better way of explaining it rather than saying I grew it in there. But after a while, the figure 8 puffer started to look kind of funny and started getting lesions and stuff on it. And so I decided I was going to lower the salinity for a while just to see if that made any changes. In their natural environment, they go through changes in salinity all the time. They never or seldom stay in the same salinity for long periods of time. And yet I had had this fish in the same salinity for several years. And when I started reducing the salinity, it started looking better. The plants, of course, started looking better almost immediately. And I'm actually having less problems now with that red cyanobacteria than I used to, because I really do believe that red cyanobacteria thrives in saltier conditions. The more salt you've got in the water, the more of that red cyanobacteria you're going to have problems with if you've got it. It just really seems to thrive in that saltier water. So with the salinity down a little bit lower, I've had better luck. But getting back to my point as to why I seem so cavalier as to not really even knowing or caring what it is, it's by nature of the kind of fish it is. It's a brackish fish, or it's a euryhaline fish that is often referred to as a brackish fish, and just by nature of that, they can go through wide ranges of salinity. That's what euryhaline means. It means a wide range of salinity. So they can go from anything from fresh water all the way up to ocean water, and anywhere in between is not that big a deal for them. So when I do a water change, I don't have to be super duper precise in my salinity. As long as it's, honestly, as long as it's water, then they're fine. They can go, like I said, in anything from fresh all the way up to full marine water. So as long as I'm putting water in the tank for them, they're okay. And if I want to keep them around a certain area of salinity, that's easy enough to do. I can eyeball the amount of salt I put in the tank and do that. But for the sake of this video, once this tank does get topped off here in a moment, I will go ahead and we will get my little refractometer out and I'll give it a check and see what the salinity on this tank actually is at the moment. We'll get a pretty good idea of it. We're just about done. I'm going to put a little bit more water in it, but by the time I get in the other room to where the faucet is, we'll be full. Alright, and as promised, I've got my refractometer. Take some water, put it on there. Now I need a bright light source, so give me a moment. And we are at 1.002. So it is definitely below brackish from the official measure. Some people say 1.005 is the bottom end of brackish, and then other people say that 1.004 is the bottom end of brackish. But anyway you slice it, 1.002 is definitely not brackish water anymore. So the next water change I do, I'll keep that in mind, and maybe I'll bring the salinity of the water up a little bit, and we'll make it a little more brackish on the next water change. Or in all likelihood, I'll just do the same thing I did today, except I'll do a 5-gallon water change, and then I'll just put some brackish water back in, and eventually the salinity will come back up a little higher, and then, you know, in time I'll do one of these larger water changes where I actually take 2 5-gallon buckets instead of the typical one. But we're not quite done yet. Give me one moment. Still got to get the hood put back on this one, and this one my hood broke, the hinge broke, so the front opening part is actually a completely separate piece of glass that just sits on there. So we'll get that on there, and then we can reposition that forward light. I'll get that turned on. It's one of those lights for a planted tank, so it's got the blue and the red LEDs in it, and that gives it that sort of funny look. And last but not least, for some reason it's the wiping of the glass that always freaks Butterbean out the most. I guess it's the fast-moving object outside the tank or whatever. I don't know, but he always seems to get freaked out when I go wiping my hand across the glass, clean it like that. So there you go, everybody. That was a much needed and long overdue water change on my brackish tank. There's probably no point in even bothering to check the nitrates. I'm sure they were nice and red. I don't get a lot of plant growth in this tank, and again, while it's not a heavily stocked tank, Butterbean is a pretty bulky fish, so that produces a fairly large bioload. And then, of course, by nature of his diet of eating all those snails and everything, it's a very messy eater. I tend to put a lot of mess into this tank, so I'm sure the nitrates in this tank were fairly high too, but again, that's not really ever a concern of mine unless they get absolutely absurdly ridiculous high, up into the hundreds and hundreds of parts per million. It's generally nothing you need to worry about. So we're good to go. That was my water change. I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget, this one is my brackish tank, even though it's not actually brackish water, but we're still going to call it my brackish tank anyway. So thanks again. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you real soon in the next one.